And good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged. And we begin tonight with a look at the situation at our southern border. Arizona's Family Investigates gave us an exclusive look inside Sasabe, where innocent people are being caught up in the crossfire. Warning, some of the images in this story are tough to look at. Morgan Lowe and photographer Mike Williams are the first journalists to travel to the town that is currently under siege.
There's beauty parlors, restaurants. Everything's boarded up.
The main street is dusty and empty. Abandoned homes and businesses line each side of the road. This is Sasabe, Sonora, Mexico.
It's never looked picturesque, but it's never been this deserted.
2,500 people called this town home just weeks ago. Now it's desolate. Take a closer look at the walls and windows and you get a hint of what happened. This is what drove all these people from this community. A war between two rival smuggling gangs, and the people who lived in Sasabe were caught in the crossfire.
Gunfire. They were being threatened and they were shooting all around their homes. Well, you saw the bullet holes.
Gail Kosarek is a volunteer with the Tucson Samaritans, an aid group that's been helping families who fled Sasabe.
I was there on Friday, and it was kind of weird. The next day, during that night, it started.
When you say it started, what started?
The fight for Sasabe.
Why would Sasabe be important for a drug gang?
Human trafficking is huge.
Kosarek says the gangs are fighting for control of a human smuggling corridor that funnels migrants across the border into Arizona.
That's the local police department, locked up and abandoned.
The library, the school, the playground, remnants of a thriving community, all deserted. Every once in a while, a vehicle speeds by. This man, who asked not to be identified, tells us we're the first Americans he's seen since the gangs took over, shooting at people, setting homes on fire, and moving into the abandoned buildings. He says there are about 20 original residents left in town. This is a smuggler's war, but its ripple effects are felt far beyond this deserted border town. Across this stretch of Sonoran desert, from Lukeville to Nogales and south from there, areas where Americans travel to resort towns like Rocky Point and San Carlos, warring gangs are using almost unimaginable violence. Here, hanging a rival gang member who was set on fire on the side of the road, leaving a warning that this will happen to anyone who helps that gang.
Wouldn't you run with your family? I would. I would say, hey, I'm not living here when there's bullets flying by. My neighbor's getting killed. They burned my neighbor's house out. I'm getting out of here.
Kosarek says some of the Sasabe families were able to get temporary permission to enter the U.S.
It's really sad to see, because they're just people like we are.
Back in Sasabe, we see dogs wandering the streets, sitting in front of their owners' abandoned homes, a sign of how quickly they had to escape. And we are there as the Mexican National Guard pulls into town, Humvees passing us one by one. In the distance, we see guardsmen going door to door, and the fight to reclaim Sasabe appears to have begun.
We've been here for about an hour. That's the amount of time we said we would spend here, so now it's time to head back north.
And we're joined now by investigative reporter Morgan Lowe, who did do that piece. Great reporting. Thanks for coming on the show to talk a little bit about that. So let's start with this. I know as a reporter, and, there's probably a lot that didn't make it into your package. Tell us a little bit about what else you saw when you were down in Sasabe.
There were two things that really stood out to me. One of them is something that we didn't see, which is the bad guys there. We didn't know what to expect. Obviously, we had security and safety on our minds, but we went specifically down there in the morning because we had heard that the gunfire starts 2 p.m. and later. So we got down there early in the morning, and it was, pretty deserted. We saw a couple of people, but we didn't see any signs of these drug gang members, these smuggling gang members. So that was a little eerie. One of the people, well, actually both of the people who we spoke to who were in Sasabe said, You may not see them, but they are watching you. So,
wow, it's kind of scary. Did you feel threatened at any point? I know in the piece down there, you made a point to point out that, look, we gave ourselves an hour to go down here and look through this, and by happenstance, it seems like you ran into some military members that were going door to door.
Yeah. So when we saw the military going door to door, it was a little bit of a sense of, okay, we may not be targeted now if we're here. So we stayed a little longer than we thought we were going to, and we stayed not really close to the military, but we could see them in the distance. So it was a little bit of a sense of security there. But the other thing that sort of stood out is we may not have seen them, but when I looked inside a couple of the windows, that had been shot up and that kind of thing, and I looked toward the door, some of these places, the front doors were barricaded from the inside, like people had pushed their couches and dressers against the door, obviously trying to protect themselves from somebody breaking in. So, without speaking to the people who fled there or seeing it happen, that really stood out to me as an example of the terror that reigned on that town.
I know you've covered and reported on the border for a very long time now.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything even close to this in your years of reporting on?
No. I mean, we've been in towns where there are sort of warring factions, and we've been in smuggling areas. But to see this town that I've been to numerous times, I mean, my family owned a ranch just north of Sasabe, so this is an area I'm very familiar with. But to see that town just deserted, it was like one of those movies where, the town's been evacuated because of a plague or a, post-apocalyptic thing. It was really, really odd.
Yeah, and moving forward too, like you also did some reporting from Lukeville. Big news this past week. That port of entry is closed. How are these things? In the reporting, the tag there, you kind of connected these two. Maybe explain a little bit more on that about kinds of risks people may be subjecting themselves to at this point.
Yeah. People might think that one is directly connected to the other. They shut the port of Lukeville down because this is happening. That's not really the case. Where the connection is there are so many people now coming to the border in Arizona. Migration sort of shifts from area to area, but right now the focus is here. There are people coming up, and that is an example of why these gangs are fighting, because they don't see these people as human beings. They see them as money. And one of the folks that I talked to, one of the people I spoke to in Lukeville, said he paid $8,000 to get to the border. So if you're one of these smuggling gangs, you are looking at this and saying, these are people we need a cut out of every one of these people coming up. We want the money that they're going to spend to get to the border. And so it's like high stakes for them.
Yeah, and again, like if you were back in Rocky Point or coming back and Lukeville's closed, I mean, if you go east of there, east of Sasabe, I mean, you're getting into that territory. If you're going that way, east of Lukeville, you're getting in that territory where this cartel war is playing out, which is about, amongst other things, it is about rights for human smuggling and drugs and things like that.
So, yeah, I mean, there is a real danger for people who are either stuck in Rocky Point or deciding if they're going to go down there. Do we go to San Luis and Yuma and do that route, or do we go east to Nogales and come through? And that area east of Lukeville and sort of west of Nogales, that is the territory that these sort of splinter groups of the Sinaloa drug cartel are now fighting over. And there are examples of real violence that's happening there right by the highways, and that Mexican highway takes you right through there. So, people are watching this or people are aware of what's going on. The safest route is definitely through Yuma and San Luis.
And I got two more questions for you, just kind of wrap this up. First of which is, how much longer do people expect to see this battle between these rival cartels play out, and ultimately, and when could people return to Sasabe if they plan on returning that? I'd like to know, that would be the first question. And the second question is, going back to Lukeville, what's the collateral damage there? We've seen some reporting about border towns on this side of the border that could be taking a hit.
Yeah, so the collateral damage is finances. It's the economy. You know, the economy north of Lukeville is dependent on tourism. So there's small towns there that are taking a big hit. Safety, you know, this drug, this smuggling violence stays south of the border. It's not good for business for these gangs to have any of that north of the border. As far as how long this war is going to last, I mean, I think it's an indication that the Sinaloa drug cartel is a little weaker now without the main guy, El Chapo, in charge and his main lieutenants. Because if this were 5, 6 years ago and these gangs were fighting over it, the main guys would come in and say, knock it off, it's bad for business. So because it's a little weaker, we're not sure how long these gangs are going to be fighting over who gets the right to guide people and drugs through there.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up there, but Morgan Lowe, investigative reporter here, thank you very much.
Sure.
He filled